So we have, once again, Tal is with us, a student who is embarking on this path of Tibetan Buddhist meditation practice. So I wanted to start by saying a couple things in general. First of all, what meditation practice is a process of becoming familiar with how our minds work. And we all have different minds, and our minds work slightly differently. And getting to know our sort of strengths and weaknesses is actually a very important part of the meditation path. We become more intimately familiar with our mind. We're starting to slow down through this practice we call shamatha, watching the breath, and or whatever object it is, and returning to it as our distracted mind comes to our awareness that we are being distracted. We return to the object of meditation. And by doing this repeatedly, we start to kind of rein in the mind that's wandering all over the place. And we start to develop some stability, some settling down of the urgency of thoughts. And therefore, we start to find some kind of neutral ground, you could almost say, of calmness. And that's kind of the starting point. So meditators have two basic, you could say, problems that we have to solve or deal with. And one is that the mind is too active. We sit down to meditate and the mind just is running wild all over the place, thought after thought after thought. Thoughts turn into narratives and stories. And before we know it, we're swept away in some movie of our own making in our mind and completely lose any sense of what we were doing. Then at some point we remember, we come back to the object of meditation. And that's the practice. And it's really, you could almost say, that simple and that basic. The thing is, as I started to say, many people, the problem is the mind just starts running away, running wild, especially when the mind thinks it's getting tamed or controlled. It's like a child, does not want to be sort of controlled. The other obstacle or problem that many meditators confront or have to deal with is the opposite of agitation or wildness. It's that the mind gets drowsy and sleepy, and we get very dull, and kind of many people fall asleep. So usually people are one or the other, and there's traditionally given ways to address these things. And this is part of the process. These are not faults. These are not bad things necessarily. These are just part of the landscape that we have to kind of relate to. So if the mind is too active, there are ways, techniques, and teachings on how to kind of rein it in, slow it down, and kind of bring it back. And then on the other hand, if the mind is too drowsy and sleepy and dull, there's ways to kind of perk up and brighten up the mind. And these are fairly simple instructions, but they're very helpful to know. So if the mind is too agitated, it's sometimes said it's helpful to even meditate on very sobering thoughts, like the truth of impermanence. That's helpful. You can...
This is if it's too active?
If the mind's too active, yes. You can also lower your gaze and that kind of thing. There's various things you can do. If the mind is dull, well, you can do practical things. You can have a cup of tea, which is a great beverage for meditators. More than coffee, actually. Coffee tends to create more agitation, but tea has a certain ability to kind of almost smooth things out. But you don't have, if you're not a tea drinker or you don't want to do caffeine, of course, that's fine. You can splash cold water on your face. These are traditionally taught things. You can open a window, get some fresh, cool air in there. Stuff like that. Straighten your spine, sit up a little straighter. Visualize a bright, shiny object in space in front of you. These are things that can perk up your mind a little bit. So there's little sort of tricks and techniques like that that are widely available. The other thing I want to say is that there's a couple styles for meditators. Some people, they meditate and they start off slow and again, either dull or agitated, and it doesn't seem to be going that well. Well, if they stick with it long enough, eventually the mind will start to kind of get in the groove and the meditation will improve as time goes on. Other people start off pretty good because they're sort of enthused and they have a good kind of focus. But then after a little time goes by, then they start to get sort of bored, or the mind starts to get then distracted. So it's helpful to know sort of, again, are you a slow starter or kind of a fast out of the gate starter as far as being a meditator? The point of all this, talking about how we meditate, is to, again, to get familiar with how our mind works. And then, as a great teacher once said that I heard him say, is that the practice of meditation is learning how to modulate your practice. So again, no one does this for you, and there's no sort of one way, and you can't always get this from books, but in your own practice, as it matures, you start to learn how to modulate things for yourself. You start to understand, oh, my mind's a little too active. And then again, as I've said before, self-responsibility, you can rein it in. On the other hand, if it's too dull, it's up to you to kind of start to perk it up. But it starts with being aware. This is always about awareness. So you have to, it starts by being aware that your mind is agitated or aware that you're too dull. And that's sometimes not as easy as it sounds. So this is part of meditation. Can be very humbling, very, very, very humbling, because we start to realize that such a deceptively simple and seemingly easy thing can be a little bit slippery. And this is the practice. And this is where the rewards are, because if you really stick with it and you learn how to modulate your practice, your meditation session, you're going to get rewards. You're going to get those brownie points you were talking about. It's going to just get better and better, but it's up to us to learn how to find the sweet spot, find the happy medium, find that space that really seems to work. And as I've said before, this doesn't come in a few weeks or a few months. So you have to bark up the wrong trees first. You have to be patient, but diligent, not passive, but also be very gentle. This is the other thing about modulating. We learn how to find that, when I say that sweet spot, that sort of gentle space where the mind is clear and focused and present. And it's not about forcing the issue and trying too hard, which can just sort of almost give you a headache or make your mind more uptight. So this is actually very, very important. It's learning how to, that's the modulation part. But many of us as Westerners, we approach meditation like we do many things in life, which is, I'm going to power through, or I'm going to, it's not about that, really. It's not about powering through. It's not about forcing the issue or being too aggressive with it. So we have to see for ourselves. If I'm too aggressive, how do I sort of back off a bit? And if I'm too passive, how do I get a little more of an edge, a little more vibrancy into my meditation practice? Because that's the thing. When let's say we're using the breath, observing the in-breath, observing the out-breath with great attentiveness. But it's not about being too heavy-handed. As I've said before in previous videos, this is not about suppressing thoughts. And many meditators, many people have said this, and I've heard this many times directly. I can't get rid of my thoughts. And this is a big, important thing. I've said this before. I'm going to say it again right now. It's not about getting rid of thoughts.
I don't know. Sorry to interrupt you there, but it really does seem like that is a big thing that people believe for some reason, that there's this way to like completely destroy thoughts, and that's what meditation is for some reason.
Yeah, well, it's not, and that's just their own naivety or something they
It must have come from some cultural thing. I mean, it didn't appear out of nowhere that that's such a huge perception out there. But that's another for another day. I was just mentioning that it really is
well, again,
everybody.
Tal, as I always say to you, I don't worry about what all these hypothetical people out there are doing. This is for you, and this is for anyone that's watching this video. You know, I've said this many times. I'm going to repeat it. It's sort of one of my personal mantras. I always say it's none of your business what the other guy or the other person on the mat is doing in their practice. This is your practice. And I can't say that strongly enough. You know, we're not here to be voyeuristic or our brother's keeper or worrying about somebody else if they're doing something right or wrong. We're missing the point if that's where your mind is going. So I'm being a little strong about this. If I'm teaching you or teaching anyone, this is your practice. So I can't say that strongly enough. It's a big distraction and it's way off base to think about other people. Do what you develop your practice and develop it well, and everything will take care of itself. That's the important thing. Okay. So I just wanted to say that. So take it with a grain of salt, and I'm not trying to be condescending or insulting to you. Okay. So anyway, so as we meditate, it is a path, and there are some techniques and certain kind of almost metaphors that are used that I find very helpful. I'm going to talk about, I've got a little list here, so I'm going to, I tend not to read things, but I'm going to just go through this little list. This is a wonderful traditional teaching from the Kagyu lineage. And this is called Teachings on How to Settle the Mind, how to get the mind to really find itself, its natural sort of state. So this is actually wonderful. The first one says, settle the mind like the sun free from clouds. And this means the sun is always shining. The nature of our mind is always present and shining. Clouds are the thoughts. Our thoughts obscure the true nature of our mind. So when the clouds dissipate, the sun just naturally shines its rays and emerges, but it's always been there. So that's a great insight and something you can use. Settle the mind like an eagle gliding through the sky. It's another one. When an eagle is really up there, it's not flapping its wings. In other words, it's not having to maintain its altitude through any real effort. So again, there's this sense of sort of effortlessness. That's the gentility. That's the calmness. That's the confidence. This is about confidence that we start to get when we find out that, oh, I can trust my own mind sort of to be itself and do the right thing. That's a great thing. That's a really great image. Settle the mind like a ship floating on the water. There's a sense of buoyancy, a sense of equilibrium. So we don't have to worry about our meditation capsizing in a sense. Settle the mind like a baby in a museum looking at artworks. I used this analogy actually the other week. The baby is just present and just sort of in awe and watching everything that's going on around it, but it's not analyzing, it's not trying to interpret. That's important because especially I think as sort of educated people, our tendency is to micromanage and sort of try to analyze everything. Meditation, again, is sort of this ability of just being present. It's not an intellectual process. In fact, if anything, we are starting to let go of concepts. And that's really, really important and really hard because we're so trained to be good students to be very educated, to be sort of sophisticated, to be intellectual. We're great at that. We're educated Western people. So to let that go may almost seem almost a little threatening. Like if I abandon my intellectual understanding and my sort of smarts, gee, what am I left with? So that's an interesting part of the exploration. And settle the mind like a piece of wool, matted wool, they say, or like a bale of hay that has had the string cut that's sort of holding it in place. The bale of hay just sort of relaxes, doesn't just fall apart. It still keeps its sort of shape, but it doesn't have to be bound so tightly to hold itself together. So these are actually can be very useful sort of analogies. The other thing that's often taught is that this is a process, sometimes called the 9 stages of how we tame the mind. And we don't have to go through each and every one of them, and the names are not that important. But the first one is called something like placing the mind. It means as we start, we learn to place the mind on the object of meditation, like the breath. Then there's repeated placing, where we come back to it because we get distracted. Then continual placement, where we kind of develop a continuity and the ability to extend and maintain that. And taming the mind, pacifying the mind. So the level of agitation, the level of distractions become more subtle, not so gross in a sense. So the point of all this, not, again, I don't emphasize memorizing lists and things like this, but the point is to understand that this is a process, and that as we do this over time, it becomes less effortful, more effortless, just easier, and we can sustain and have some continuity with this as time goes on. So these are sort of the basic things. We just do it. Really, there's not that much in terms of meditation that needs to be said. Sort of less is more. We don't have to talk it to death. We don't have to micromanage this. Really, it's just, as I've said before, this is for you to do your practice and develop your own relationship, in a sense, with it. Okay. Comments, questions, thoughts?
No, not at this time. I'm just taking it all in and I'm actually working on being really present at the moment and just taking everything they were saying. And usually I take notes, and I think that kind of distracts me a little bit, and I'd rather.
Yeah, it's good to get the big picture. Just relax as we hear things. I think that's really, really great. We don't have to worry about, gee, maybe I'll forget something, or I need to pin it down. I guess what I could say is something about the amount of time we spend practicing. So again, if you start to burn out, don't do it for too long. If your practice starts off pretty good and then it just sort of kind of starts to unravel and fall apart, and you get so distracted or something, then cut it off. It's often said, stop when it's going good. Don't stop when it's going bad, because it makes it sort of more distasteful to come back to it the next time, because you sort of have a bad memory in your mind. But if you stop when it's actually going well, it's going to leave you with a desire to come back to it next time. I think that's actually a very skillful instruction.
Would you say that you should set a timer, or you should just let it naturally?
So that's a great question. Many people use some kind of a bell or timer or clock, sure, because it holds you accountable. In other words, if you meditate, if you're saying, I'm going to do 20 minutes, your mind may want to stop at 12 minutes or 18 minutes or something short of 20, but and if you give into that, that develops sort of a bad habit of stopping shy of kind of the goal. It's good to fulfill your obligation to the goal. If you're saying you're going to do 20 minutes, do 20 minutes. Don't do 19 minutes. Do 20 full minutes, and experience what that's like. This is about stretching our muscles. So we do a little more than we may be capable of, in a sense, because we see what our mind does when it gets impatient. It wants it to be over. That's part of the practice. Don't do too much. Don't do too little. Don't push too hard, too fast, because that's a prescription for burning out and getting discouraged, and you'll lose it. It's, as they say, it's a marathon, not a sprint. Meaning the marathon is, you want to be able to do this for years and years and years to come. And so don't try to be a hero and do it all in the first few months or something,
I'd like to do 10 minutes a day consistently before
great.
I move up from there. But I actually, one of the things that got me to do it for a long period of time started out for the first like 20 sessions were 1 or 2 minutes.
That's fine. That's nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with that at all. And then ratchet it up as time goes by. Another thing that, at least for myself, when I was kind of initially starting, there was some accountability, because I would go to a Dharma center, and we had a Lama, and one day a week, like on a Sunday morning, we would do a 50 or 60 minute. And that was a stretch, and that was a challenge. And, but it does sort of build up your muscles a little quicker. I think of it as like baseball. When you're on the on deck circle waiting to go to bat, you swing a couple bats, and then you get rid of one. Of course, you only take one bat up to the plate, but because you were swinging a couple bats, that one bat's a lot lighter, and you can just really, hammer it a lot easier, swing it much harder and faster. So by occasionally challenging yourself and meditating a little longer than you're sort of accustomed to, I think that's this analogy like that. Then when you do a shorter meditation, it's kind of a piece of cake. It's a little bit easier for you.
Yeah, makes sense.
So like that, like I said, all these things are just little tricks of the trade. Again, there's a lot of leeway that we have. Like I said, if you need to drink a little caffeine, if you need to stretch your legs, if you need to open a window, anything you need to do to make it a little bit easier and keep your mind sort of fresh and present. And
I just got to stop hitting the snooze button just for like two snoozes, and I'll be able to get my what I want to be done in the morning.
Well, and tell yourself the night before, make that really strong intention the night before, when you go to sleep, like, I'm going to get up, I'm going to practice tomorrow. I'm not going to give in to sort of my normal laziness and, my snooze time, and do it one day at a time like that. But every day, try to, see if you can do that, or set a goal. Like, I'm going to do the next 7 days in a row. I'm not going to miss a day all week long. And, that kind of thing, just try your best.
That is my intention for the next 7 days.
Good. And reiterate it every day. Every day, remind yourself that this is my intention. So that's being kind to ourselves. It's positive self-talk. Okay. Thank you very much. Thanks for everyone's attention, and take care.
Thank you, Lama.